All right, what's up, assholes? Welcome to 2025 Fantasy Football. I've discussed this with a couple of you guys, but figured putting together a presentation would be a little bit easier to understand here. So basically, the main goal here is to switch us over to a Dynasty League. I found a platform that allows us to not only do Dynasty, but allows us to actually integrate salary caps. So we'll go over that here in our little PowerPoint over here. But I'm just going to go through each slide here and just kind of read through the setup, the rules, kind of what to expect. And then, of course, if you guys have questions, you can text, call, email me, whatever. So, anyways, the new Dynasty League setup here is going to be on League Tycoon. You can see this website over here on the right. It is free to join and check out until September 1st. I'll send you guys a link, an invite link to the email. Apparently, you have to use a Gmail or an Apple email to sign in. It is what it is. The cost to actually use the software is $11.99 per team, and so you guys would have to pay that out of pocket, and that'll give you an entry token to be able to play on the software. Um, League Tycoon, though, does give out a free ranked league token with every $11.99 purchase that you can use to enter other fantasy contests where you can win free entry tokens for future years. They claim that 60% of their yearly tokens are given away for free in these types of fantasy contests. And then there's a link here for the ranked competition. So, from what I gather on this is just kind of like daily fantasy, or I don't really get it. I haven't looked too much into it, but everyone will get a token. You can play other people in fantasy and win tokens, whatever. All right, so some of the pros and cons to switching over to a salary dynasty. The pros, I think, are more trading will occur. Our league's been pretty dead as far as trades go. It's usually teams will draft their teams and just kind of stick with it, so it gets a little boring. You'll become more invested in your team since you'll be the ones doing the actual draft and management of it. There's a new strategy. Salary offers a risk and reward, more in-depth team management. It's fun to try something new. More pride in actually winning since luck doesn't really factor in. Unlike our Yahoo League, some teams just get lucky with their draft. There will be rookie drafts and rookie draft picks and a rookie draft each year, so we can actually trade and manage draft picks, which is cool. And then, of course, there will really be no off season since we'll be able to trade these draft picks, research rookies, and so forth. The cons will be, if we decide to do this, the initial draft that we have this year will definitely be much longer. I anticipate it being about 5 hours, just because it's going to take a while for us to build these teams. Of course, you'll be kind of stuck with your team from year to year, unless you're making trades or whatever. There is the $12 yearly cost, unless you win those free entries I was talking about. And then you have to manage your salary. And then there's really no reset of a bad team unless you're trading players away, drafting good rookies, whatever. It's kind of slower paced. And then, of course, the big one is if a team owner drops out, it's going to be hard to get a new owner to take over. So I wanted to make this presentation to give you guys all the information, and if you're on board, great. If not, just let me know from the get-go, because I would rather you say no now than go through the process of drafting a team and then abandoning the league in a year or two. I did create a survey here that I'll send you guys the link to. This just has a bunch of questions about kind of the new setup, what we're going over, when we want to draft, and et cetera. And so you can pause here and just kind of skim through these. Really, just the big ones are: do we want to change the payout? Do we want to change the buy-in? Do we want to charge more money so that the payouts will be bigger? Do we want to make adjustments to our roster, like getting rid of kickers or defenses, IDPs? Do we want to introduce PPR? Do we want to include median scoring, which is basically, of course, you'll get a point for a normal head-to-head win, just like you would in our Yahoo League. But then if you're one of the top 5 finishing teams in points, even if you still get a loss that week in head-to-head, you'll actually get a winning point. Of course, if you're a high-scoring team and you win your head-to-head matchup, then you would get 2 points that week. So all of this is here within the survey. And of course, if you got any questions, just let me know. A couple brief notes about some scoring changes. I've increased the IDP sacks from 2 points to 4 points, an IDP fumble recovered from 2 points to 3 points. And then in this league, they actually allow players who return a kick or a punt for a touchdown to be awarded 6 points. So in the past, I've been asked that before. Hey, I have a wide receiver who was on special teams and returned a kick, and I did not get any points. Well, that resolves this in this league. And then, of course, the actual defense special teams will get 6 points for a kickoff return as well. Fumbles were a little bit different on this platform. It used to be on Yahoo that if your player fumbled, they would lose half a point. And if they lost that fumble, they would lose 1.5. So a fumble and a fumble loss would be -2 points. On the new platform, they don't allow to differentiate fumbles and fumbles lost. So now if your player fumbles and the team doesn't lose it, there's no penalty. If they fumble and they lose it, then they will lose 1 point, which I think is more fair. Kicking settings were changed as well. On Yahoo, they did not allow 60 plus yards to be awarded 6 points. The most they would allow was 5. So now if you have a kicker that can kick a 60-yard plus field goal, you'll get 6 points. I changed up the defense a little bit, and this is just to prevent a lot of negative scoring within defense, and it'll actually make good defenses worth more value. And so you can read through these here, but really the big things is previously there were negative points that would occur if your defense gave up a lot of points. And now with the new league, basically, if you get to 22 plus points allowed, your defense won't be penalized. There won't be negative points. They'll just score 0. We do still have the same scoring bonuses that we had in Yahoo. So quarterbacks throwing for 400 yards, blah, blah, blah. You can read through those. So with switching over to Dynasty, from what I've read and researched, having deeper rosters is just kind of expected. So anything you see here in yellow has changed or blue has notes. But instead of sticking with a standard 2 QB league like we were, I've now switched it over to a 1 QB and a Superflex. So you can start a QB, wide receiver, running back, or tight end in your Superflex position. Still 3 receivers, 2 running backs, 1 tight end, and then 1 standard flex. Kickers and defense, if we decide to move forward with keeping them, which I'm in favor of, I think it adds some randomness to the game. I'm going to enforce 3 rosterable kickers and 3 rosterable defenses per team. This just avoids players, rostering a ton of defenses, blocking other teams from being able to get them. I've increased the IDPs from just 2 any IDPs to now specific positions. So we'll have to have 1 defensive line, 2 linebackers, and then 1 DB, so like a safety or a corner. I've increased the bench from 7 to 10. And with a Dynasty League, we now have what's called a taxi squad. These will only apply to rookies, which we'll get to later. But basically, you can draft rookies, keep them on a taxi squad, meaning they're just kind of on standby. And when you decide to move those rookies off from the taxi squad to your permanent squad, you can't move them back. The advantage of using the taxi squad is basically they won't impact your salary as much. So here's a new overview of the new lineup. All right, so here's how the draft actually works. Basically, in year 1, we're going to draft players, and that does include this year's rookies, so your Ashton Genties and so forth. And it will be an auction-style draft. Teams will take turns nominating a player of their choosing to go up on the auction block. All teams will be able to bid as many times as needed until eventually no other teams want to bid. The clock will expire, and then the highest bidding player will add that player to their team. The order that you draft in really doesn't matter just because it's going to be an auction style, so having the first overall pick doesn't really matter. However, any player that you nominate that does not get bid on will automatically get drafted to your team for the minimum salary of $1. So there's some strategy here about nominating players later in the draft. The opening bid starts at 30 seconds, and each time another bid is made, the clock will reset to 10 seconds, so other team owners can think about it or bid during that 10 seconds. Then when the time expires, whatever the highest bidder is will earn that player to their lineup. The time can be shortened to less than 30 seconds in other rounds. So once we start getting into deeper rounds, we'll probably cut that down to 15 seconds or something for the nomination time, just to kind of speed up the draft. Starting in year 2 or 2026 and beyond, we will begin the draft by doing a rookies only draft. The rookie draft order will be based on your standings or playoff seedings. We'll go over that later. Rookies will automatically be given a 3-year contract, and their pay will be based on where they are selected. More on this later. The rookie draft will have a 60-second timer for each pick, and we'll have 5 rounds of rookies. So that will be, with 10 teams, that's going to be 50 rookies that will get drafted. There are no rookie option contracts in our league, which basically just means if a rookie is in their last year of their contract, you cannot add an additional, option contract for a 1-year extension. After the rookie draft, we'll have another auction-style draft, just like we do in the normal year 1, and that will contain any undrafted rookies as well as any free agents who are not under contract the previous year. So this will start making sense as we go on. So our salary cap overview, we will start with 300 in total salary cap. It is required to keep 100 of that 300 salary cap as a reserve so that team owners do not make the mistake of spending all their money during the first year's draft. So this means every team entering the 2025, first year auction draft will have 200 to spend bidding for players. And then after the draft, any unused funds will be added to your reserved 100 to get your total remaining salary available to spend. Year 2 and beyond, the salary cap will increase by 5% each year. So in 2026, it will be 315 instead of 300. 2027, it'll be 331, and so on. So team owners can spend up to 200 in the first year auction draft. However, just because you can doesn't mean that you should. After the first year's auction draft occurs, whatever salary was not spent in the auction draft is added to your $100 cap reserve, and this becomes how much money you have left to spend. So if a team owner spends $160 in the 2025 auction draft, they would then have $40 left over, which gets added to their cap reserve of $100. And this means that the team will now have $140 available salary to spend how they want in the 2025 season. So acquiring free agents, initiating trades, free auction or free agent auction, bidding, fab, etc. It's important to note that you must have more than $100 in total free salary cap to be able to participate in the next year's auction draft. This is because teams are required to always have at least 100 in their reserve salary cap to make in-season transactions. This is why it's ideal to spend really no more than 160 to 180 in the auction draft. This will start to make sense. I've got more examples throughout the slide here. Player contracts. So you are allowed to make as many 2 or 3 year contracts as you would like to use. Meaning if you draft a perfect team and you want to extend every single player all the way down to your bench to 3-year contracts, you can certainly do so. I think most people won't have a absolutely perfect team that they want to extend every player to 3-year contracts, but you can. There's definitely downsides to doing so. It kind of traps you in with those players, and we'll go over more of that later. Player contracts will start based on their winning auction amount for the first year and will increase by 10% every year. So for example, if a player is drafted from the auction draft for $20 and then signed to a 3-year contract, in the first year, here in 2025, there will be $20. Year 2, they'll go up to $22, and then year 3, they'll go up to $25. Salaries and all dollar amounts always round up to the nearest dollar, so if a calculation of 10% comes out to be $27.50, it gets rounded up to $28. All right, so in-season player acquisition. So this is your, during the season free agents or waivers. So free agent auction bidding or FAB, when players are undrafted or no longer on a team owner's roster, they will be in the free agent or waiver pool. Players on waivers are acquired from here after each week of the fantasy season by players blind bidding. Whoever bids the most wins that player, and the FAB spent on the player becomes the contract amount for that year. Free agents are only signed for the current year they are acquired, so you cannot just I'll just keep reading. You cannot extend free agent players unless using a franchise tag, and we'll go over that later. This discourages team owners from going crazy, stashing a ton of free agents, hoping one of them will end up being a great player, and then extending them. So any money spent in the current season on a free agent will be given back to your salary cap next year after they are dropped from your roster. So in conclusion, if you're getting a free agent or you're winning a player from Fab, you're just going to pay for them for that 1 year, and then at the conclusion of the fantasy season, they'll be dropped from your roster, and any money that you spent on them will just be refunded back to your salary cap. If the acquired player is dropped, money spent on this player will remain dead money spent, but since free agents are only acquired with 1 year deals, basically only impacting your roster and salary cap for the current season, they'll not impact your salary cap for the following year. So basically what I just said. Waivers will be very similar to the Yahoo League, and players will clear waivers by Wednesday morning. All players not signed to teams will be free agents, and you'll be available to pick them up for the low price of only $1. I've heard some feedback saying that in our current Yahoo League, there were just a lack of available players. Once the season got into swing, it was very hard to pick up free agents that would actually contribute to your team. And I agree. So there's an understandable concern with increasing the team size by 5 players, meaning we've added 3 more bench and 2 more IDPs. You would think it would exaggerate the problem going forward. However, with Dynasty Leagues, teams are much deeper, and they will have a lot less stud players on their roster since the salary cap prevents this. So adding more bench spots actually helps struggling teams increase their likelihood of finding players that can contribute to their teams at any given point, and also converting from 2 QBs to now 1 QB and 1 Superflex should resolve this issue. I am definitely open to any feedback on the roster size or roster construction. All right, about halfway through. All right, so here's a couple of draft scenarios for, a hypothetical player here. So the one major thing to take away from this, since it's all new, is our total salary cap for the year is $300, but only $200 is allowed to be spent in the draft. So that means $100 is going to be pushed off to the side. This is kept as our cap reserve and becomes actual money after the draft is done. So just think of it that way. A good draft strategy is to probably spend around 160 to 180 in the draft. This ensures that you have additional money left over to pay for any contract extensions you might want to give your players, or acquire players via trade and so forth. Just having extra salary available is a good idea. Of course, any player not given a contract extension, once the season concludes, they will be available for next year's auction draft. All right, so here's contract situation 1. So this team owner goes through, drafts a full team, but they decide to sign no players to extensions. And so to recap here, our 2025 salary cap total is $300. They were allowed to use $200 in the draft, but $100 was kept to the side. So this player ended up actually spending all $200 on their team. This means they will enter the season with only the required $100 that's kept on the side as the reserve cap. So let's say the season's in motion and this player decides to spend $50 during the Fab auction on acquiring a free agent named Jimmy Horn, and then they end up getting another receiver here for $30. So this takes $80 out of their $100 that they have reserved, and they will have $20 left over for the entire year for any other moves. But this player decides, nope, I'm good with my team. They end up just leaving that $20 on the table, and that's fine. So since this team spent $0 extending any player contracts, they let everybody go to free agency, and they only spent money on these free agents for little 1-year deals, and they get dropped from their roster. All players will end up leaving the roster, and they will enter next year's auction draft. This player now has 315 in their total cap going into the auction draft because there's a 5% cap increase. But they have to follow the same salary cap requirements as always, so that means they have to have 100 in reserve, and so they take $215 into the next year's auction draft. which would be great. You'd have a lot of money to spend in the following year, but your roster would be completely wiped and you'd be picking up pretty much nothing but scrubs. So this is kind of what it looks like entering year two. Obviously, the strategy isn't great since even though the team owner will, um, be able to enter the draft with really the most money, they're just going to be picking up scrubs. So here's contract situation two. So this team owner decides to extend some of the players to extensions. So same thing. They go through. They end up drafting the same team. They actually spend all $200. But you can see here in year two, they only extend some of their better players. So like Josh Allen, Malik Neighbors, whatever. And so their amount that they have on the books going into year 2026 is $159. This player goes through and does the same moves as we talked about before, but they actually end up grabbing another free agent for 20. So they end up spending all of their 100 in reserved cap on their free agents. And, since they spent 200 in the draft, they're basically, they have $0 at this point. So once you get to a point where you have no available salary cap, your team will no longer be able to pick up free agents, make trades, etc., since they will no longer have available cap space. League Tycoon will prevent this team owner from making any other moves. So the software over here does have guardrails in place that if you end up getting yourself into salary trouble or you're just at your limit, the software will not allow you to make any other changes. So on the books, we've got this team for 159 in contracts. So entering year two, there is the 5% salary cap increase. So that means the cap goes up to 315 instead of 300. Of course, you got to have the 100 in reserve, and the amount spent on the 2026 contracts is 159. So this team, what they'll be able to use in the 2026 auction draft would be the salary cap, 315 minus the 100 required in reserve cap space, and then minus their 159 in contracts that they signed for 2026. So that gives them $56 to go into the 2026 auction draft. So, pretty good, right? And of course, you see the number 156 here because the 100 will be for the reserve for picking up free agents once the season starts. So 56 is what's allowed in the draft. If they don't spend that 56, then they would take all 156 into the season. They could spend that on free agents, trades, whatever. But in this situation, they would have $56 to spend in the auction draft. So one other thing to note here is that even though not all of the players on their roster in 2026 are contracted to be on the team in 2027, since player salaries increase by 10% each year, the salaries in 2027, which come out to 179, are actually more expensive than in 2026, 169, with less players. So you can see here, like Spencer Rattler does not get renewed. He becomes a free agent. Darius Slayton becomes a free agent. But since all these contracts go up by 10% every year, you can see how year after year, signing more and more players ends up taking more and more of your salary cap every year. Okay, this is the worst one right here. Contract situation 3. This is a team owner who decides to extend every single player, doesn't care. They think they have the perfect team. So same situation. Spent all $200 in year one in the auction. And then amount on 2026. Okay, ignore that. Get rid of that. So anyways, they end up spending all 200. And then, of course, they'll be able to enter the season with 100 in their reserve cap, so they can still acquire free agents. They go through and they spend 100 on these 3 free agents. That, of course, removes their 100 from their total salary cap, which leaves this owner with $0 left for the entire year since they spent 200 in the draft and 100 on these 3 players above. So this team has made the mistake of spending all 200 in the draft as well as all 100 in their reserve cap space, which means they are no longer able to make moves during the season. Their roster will be locked. The real problem for this team comes in 2026 season and beyond, and you can see here. All right, so Essentially, since this team has extended every player on their team, their salary cap situation is bad. They are over the salary cap by $18, even with the 5% salary increase. So it goes up to $315 in year two. And then, of course, even with the $100 being refunded from these three free agents that end up getting dropped from their roster at the end of the year, they still are over the salary cap by $18, meaning that they've only got technically 82 in cap space. But remember, you're required to have more than $100 in the minimum reserve cap. So since this player only has 82, they're in what they call cap hell. So this team will be able to nominate players in the auction draft, but if and only if no other team bids on that player, then they will win that player to their team for $1. So that's all you get to do if you are over the cap entering the draft. You'll still be able to sit in. You can still make nominations, but only players that you nominate that no one else bids on will join your roster for $1. So even in this situation, their roster is still going to be locked from being able to make any moves. So the only way to unlock the roster to be able to make moves, set your lineup, whatever, would be to get back under the salary cap. So in this example, if the team traded away their $22 Jared Goff, then they would bring their cap back under by $4, but still in a pretty bad cap situation. So bottom line is when you draft a team, you're probably not going to sign all these players to extensions. I mean, a lot of these players on the bench are pretty garbage, but this just goes to show why you would not want to do that. All right, so players drafted from the auction draft are automatically given just the 1-year deal for the amount that you drafted them to. So in our example, Josh Allen, we won him from the auction for $50. So that's his initial year price. You can sign any player that you won from the draft for up to a maximum of a 3-year contract. Keep in mind the current year that the player is on your team counts as a year under contract. So a 3-year contract would be for 2025, 26, and 27. You can re-sign or give an extension to any player to another maximum 3-year contract. So putting your maximum ownership time at 6 years total. You could, of course, sign a player for less than 3 years total on a given deal. So you could maybe do 3 years on their first contract and then 2 years on their extension. But since you can only give a player a contract or an extension twice, you should be certain on the contract length when you sign it. You must sign a player to a contract or an extension before the first week of the NFL season begins. Meaning if you have a player on the last year of their contract but do not sign them to an extension before week 1 begins, they will be dropped from your roster at the end of the fantasy football season and available in the upcoming auction draft. So very important. If we end up having our draft on, let's say, the last Saturday before the season starts, that's only going to give you about 5 days until Thursday football kicks off. So we may want to aim for like mid-August when it comes to the draft. All right, so extensions, not to be confused directly with contracts. This is, anytime you're giving an extension, that is actually technically your second contract you're giving a player. So players are eligible for extensions when entering the final year of their original contract. So you wouldn't be able to sign a player for 3 years and then immediately extend them for another 3. You have to wait until the final year of their contract. And then keep in mind that players on 1-year contracts, so like your free agents that you pick up, or drafted players that you decided not to give a contract to before week 1 of the NFL season kicks off, you'll never be able to give them an extension. Players selected in the rookie draft, more on this later, will be defaulted to a 3-year contract, meaning that they can, of course, be extended. So you could own a rookie for 6 years just like a normal player. So the contract extensions, meaning the second contract you give to a player, have a minimum salary of $10, meaning if you have a player on your roster that you were only paying a $3 contract to, but you want to extend them, it will bump them up to the minimum salary of $10. This only applies, again, to the extension contracts, meaning the second contract you offer a player. So, if you end up getting a player in the actual draft for only $1, and then you give them a 3-year contract, you'll pay them $2 in year 2, $3 in year 3, But if you really like this player that you got for only $1 and you want to give them a second contract, aka an extension, well, then their minimum salary is going to go up to $10. And then, of course, it would just continue with the normal 10% salary increase that we had discussed before. And actually, I don't know if I did discuss that before, but it's got to be in here somewhere. Anyways, when you sign a player to a contract, their increase becomes 10% every year. So if we look at, let's say, Joe Mixon here, so he would year one salary would be $10, year two would be 11, year three would be 13, since it always rounds up. I don't know if I covered that or not, but anyways. All right, dead money penalty. So if you drop a player from your team that is under contract, you'll incur a dead money penalty. If the player is within their current 1-year contract and dropped, you will not incur a future dead money penalty, but you will just not receive a refund for their salary for that year. So if you end up drafting a player for $50 and you don't have them on a contract and you drop them, you're not going to incur any kind of penalty, but you just won't receive the $50 that you paid for them for that year back to your salary. This goes over a little bit more. If you've got a player with 2 years remaining on their contract, then only 25% of their salary is dead money. 3 years remaining, 50%. And keep in mind, this only impacts the following season. So even if they have 3 years left, you're not penalized for the year 2026 and 2027. You'd just be penalized in 2026. So, for example, you have a $40 player that has 3 years left on their contract and you drop them. You'll not receive a salary refund for the $40 that you paid them this year in 2025. And then next season in 2026, you'll incur a penalty of $20, which is 50% of that player's salary. You'll not see a penalty on 2027. Okay, draft strategy. I'll just go over this real quick. You guys can come up with your own strategies, but basically, it's not advised to give extension to players who you might think you can get cheaper next year. So, like old players, for example, you might want George Kittle on your team. He was the #1 tight end last year, but the 49ers might not start to feature him, or they might trade him, or whatever. So, even if you want him in the auction with a salary of $30 this year, but you don't want to extend him and therefore paying a 10% salary increase every year, you can just gamble on keeping him for the 1 year, let him go back to the auction block next year, and then just see if you can win him back to your team for cheaper next year. Maybe you can bid only $20 next year, and that saves you money. Another example of the inverse would be when a contract definitely makes sense. Let's say last year you acquired a player like Brock Bowers for only $3, which is cheap for a rookie tight end. Well, it would definitely make sense to extend this player, since even with a 10% salary increase, it's not going to cost much if he doesn't pan out as a player. Okay, rookie compensation. So once we do get into 2026 and everyone has their rookie picks, there's definitely value to having the first overall, but having the first overall rookie pick is going to cost you a little bit more than having the second, third, fourth, and so forth. So the first overall pick is always going to be 5% of our total salary cap. So in 10 years from now, if our salary cap is up to 500 or whatever, it's going to be more like 25 for the first overall pick. These percentages are very rough. I couldn't actually find the percentages off from the website, but I was able to kind of come up with a calculation for it. So a first overall in the rookie draft next year, based off from a salary cap of 315, would be about 16. Second overall rookie picks, 14. Third overall pick should be about 14, and so forth. You can see later on, just having any second round pick, all of them will be $6. Any third round pick, all of them will be $3. Fourth and fifth round picks are super cheap as well. So really, there's not much salary difference other than those that are in the first round. And yeah, so that talks about next year's draft. You'd anticipate the first overall pick being like $17 instead of 16, and so forth. All right, trades. So any player's current contract gets traded with the player. So if you have a player on a 3-year deal and you trade him off, the player that accepts that trade is going to accept the remainder of that 3-year contract. There's 2 ways to go about proposing a trade. You can just select a team owner that you want to initiate a trade with, just like we would do on Yahoo, and say, hey, I want this player for this. or you can list a player or even your draft pick or a combination on the trade auction block. So when you're setting an offer on the trade auction block, you basically list the assets that you're wanting to trade away. So a player, draft pick, or a combination. Other teams can then send over players, draft picks, whatever, to see if you will accept the offer. When an offer comes in, the team listing the trade can either move that offer to winning or just straight up reject it. If it's moved to winning, there will be 12 hours for others to submit counter offers. And then the team that's listing the trade, if they accept a new offer and then they move that new offer to winning, it'll become the new winning trade. If time expires on that winning trade, even if there's other offers still pending and an offer's been set to winning, it will be accepted and processed. Once a trade offer is moved to winning, it will become guaranteed and cannot be revoked. And so just keep that in mind. You can see here over on the right-hand side, where is trades? So right here, trades, create a trade. So you have the option of doing a trade auction, which is what I just talked about, or just select a team and make an offer directly. So you have either option. Your rookie draft picks can be traded out up to 2 years in advance. So that's kind of cool. If you're thinking your team's really solid and you just need some help maybe this year to win the championship, maybe you're not super concerned about rookie picks in the next couple of years, or if your team's in a rebuild mode, you might want to acquire as many rookie picks as possible. Okay, here's another curveball. We've got the franchise tag. So each team will be assigned one franchise tag that can be used each season on any player that is on the last year of their contract. This does include players that are acquired via free agency or fab bidding. So I had said in our contract examples up here above, this player's acquired these 3 players, and then of course the season ends and they get dropped off, which refunds the 100 back to their salary. You can actually kind of mess around with your free agents by going through and actually extending one of them. So if you do find a really nice rookie that you're paying cheap money for, go ahead and apply the franchise tag to them, and that will extend them for just 1 year. Keep in mind, a player can only be a franchise tagged one time on your team, so you can't just keep rinsing and repeating it. The cost of the franchise tag is calculated as the average of the top most expensive players at the player's position, or the player's existing salary plus a 10% increase, whichever is greater. The specific tag amount for each eligible player will be displayed on the contract screen for your team, so you can make an informed decision before you apply that tag. You must have the available cap space in order to franchise tag a player. So let's say last year you ended up finding Puka Nacua as a free agent and you paid $5 or $10 or whatever for him. Well, if you want to apply that franchise tag, his salary is going to be based on the top 8 wide receivers, which, when you guys sign up, you can play around with the platform over here, but this draft room here is kind of cool because you can actually kind of see what the recommended salaries are for each of the positions. So for example, if you did this, franchise tag with Puka Nacua, the top 8 players here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So Puka Nacua's franchise tag would actually ironically be right around here, like 19 or so dollars. But of course, when we actually do our auction, it's going to be based on the actual salaries that people pay. So if somebody goes crazy for Jamar Chase and pays, let's say $50 or $60 in salary, well, that's going to bump up the average of the top 8. All right. Your practice and taxi squad. So we'll have 15 practice or taxi squad. I'm just going to call it taxi squad from now on your roster. These are reserved for rookies only, so we don't have to worry about this until 2026, when we will, have an actual rookie draft, since we won't this year. Players or rookies that are drafted to your taxi squad will only have 25% of their salary count against your salary cap. So this allows you to stash players for really cheap, rookies for really cheap. Players on the taxi squad will not have their salaries increased by 10% either, like normal players. So remember, I said when rookies are drafted, they're given 3-year contracts. In our example here, let's say you ended up winning you had the 1.1 pick for $16. Well, as that player sits on your taxi squad, his salary is only going to be $16 for all 3 of those years. Yeah. So also, these players will not incur any dead money penalty if they're dropped from your team. So if you draft a rookie and he's a bust and you get rid of him, it is what it is. Don't worry if they still have years left on their rookie contract. All right, once a player is moved off from your taxi squad into a starting position, they are no longer allowed to go back. Players can be moved to a bench spot and back to the taxi squad. So you could maybe use this, I don't know, for whatever reason. You can move them back and forth between a bench spot, but once you move a rookie from the taxi squad into starting, that's it. They're not going back. Also, a player who is moved from the taxi squad to a starting role will have their full salary impact on your salary cap. So going back here, the first overall rookie would be $16, but keep in mind that they are only going to be 25%, so they're only going to charge $4 on your taxi squad. But if you move that player from your taxi squad to your starting role, then their salary of $16 kicks in. All right, last two slides here. So the injured reserve, only players with a qualifying IR status are allowed to be placed in one of the two IR spots that we will have available. So here's the statuses: out, doubtful, injured reserve, PUP, COVID, not eligible, suspended, probable, questionable. When a player is no longer eligible for the IR slot, you must move them out of your IR before you are allowed to modify your lineup. I can't remember if this is how it was in Yahoo. I want to say if a player was no longer on IR, you did have to move them either to your bench or back into your lineup in order to make edits. So I don't think anything's changed there. Also, keep in mind there is no salary reduction for moving a player to IR. So if a player gets hurt and they're on injured reserve, it is what it is. You move them to one of your two spots. You can decide if you want to cut them and pay dead money and just get rid of them off your roster, or if you just want to keep them on IR. Totally up to you. All right, last slide here. So this is just an idea for preventing tanking. And I'm open to feedback on this as well, but the traditional draft order would obviously be determined where whoever finishes first in the playoffs is going to get the 10th pick, and whoever finished in last place would get the first pick. My idea to prevent tanking would be to still keep the same. All the playoff teams would be picks 10, 9, 8, and 7. However, to incentivize players from continuing to play throughout the year, I think it would be a cool idea to give 5th place overall the first pick in the rookie draft and so forth. So if you end up being really truly the worst team, the best you can hope for would be the 6th overall in the rookie draft, which is still a good pick. You could obviously trade around your picks and whatever. It doesn't mean you're locked into that pick, but I do think this would at least give people some incentive to continue playing. Let me know your feedback. But all right, that's it. Yeah, I'm gonna send you guys the link. Feel free to play around in here once you sign in. Like I said, you can enter the draft lobby. You can go into the settings here, so you could look at, like, I don't know, scoring, whatever. You can look at just look through the settings over here. I think you'll find it kind of interesting. There's not a whole lot in here just because obviously we haven't drafted, but join here, click around, check it out. If you guys have any questions that I didn't answer, I'm going to send you a link to this introductory video that does a pretty good job kind of explaining an overview. Obviously, my presentation here was way more thorough, but there is, kind of a rule guide here. So if you got a question about, free agent contracts or whatever it may be, just go to leaguetycoon.com. And yeah, fill out this survey just so I know what you guys think about everything. And like I said, feel free to text, call, or email. All right, see you.